In the previous videos, we have started discussing qualitative data, and we constructed frequency distributions. We calculated the relative frequency. We counted how many there were. The table is great in a way. It organizes our data a little bit, but it's not very pleasing to the eye. What we want to do is have something that's pleasing to the eye, something that's a quick read, quick look at. One type of item that we can create then is a bar graph. So a bar graph is just a graphical representation of that frequency distribution. It's constructed by labeling each category of data on either the horizontal or the vertical axis, and the frequency or the relative frequency of the category on the other axis. So in other words, you're going to have either your categories down here, and then frequency or relative frequency. You can have either one along the side, or you could create it to where you have the categories over here and the frequency, relative frequency here. And then what you do is you create bars for each category. And you create bars based on the height of your frequency. Okay? So you'll notice that these are drawn in different directions. And that's because you always want the base of your bars along the axis with your categories. And then you want to go up to the height of your frequency. So let's remember our data for our M&Ms. Okay, we had 12 brown M&Ms, 10 yellow, 9 red, 6 orange, 3 blue, and 5 green. And we calculated their relative frequencies. So what I would like to do now is construct a frequency bar graph. Now notice that this graph is already set up a little bit for you. A couple of things to note for sure is that I have color down here. Okay. And so I've got color here. And then I've got frequency over here. I labeled those things. You want to make sure that you label your axes. Otherwise, the reader of the graph has no clue what you're looking at. Okay? So let's look at constructing a frequency distribution. Frequency bar graph. The frequency bar graph says I'm putting my categories along the horizontal axis, and I'm putting my frequency along the vertical axis. Again, this could be rotated. And then for brown, I had 12 brown. So I'm going to draw a bar for brown. Now you'll notice I'm not an artist, so I have a little bit of trouble. If I was doing this on a computer or for an actual presentation, I would be very precise and have nice, neat bars. Thankfully, this is not an art class. Okay, so for yellow, I had 10. Now, between these two bars, I want to go ahead and point something out. You'll notice that this bar may be a little bit wider than this bar. I really need to try to make them approximately the same size. I do not want to make a bar that's this skinny and then another bar that's this wide. Okay? We really want to try to make sure that we make them as close to the same size as possible. the same width as possible. Now for red, we had 9. Well, I don't have a number 9 over here, but what I can do is I can go halfway in between and then draw my bar. Orange, we had 6. It's very nice if they're even like this. I can just draw up to the line. Blue, I had 3. So I'm going to draw halfway in between that line. And then green, I had 5. So I'm going to come up to 5 and draw halfway in between that line. When you're drawing these, you'll also notice that over here on this frequency, I counted by the same value on each line. In other words, I did not go 0, 3, 5, 8, 9, 10, 15, that type of thing. I counted by 2s. I went 0, 2, 4, 6, 8. You are more than welcome to make your scale whatever you need it to be. You may need to count by 5s. You may need to count by 100. What we do want to point out, though, is that you always start with a 0 on the bottom. There is a way, in case, say, you're going to 1,000. Normally, what we do there is we have this little squiggly line that gives us a break. It's telling me I shrunk the graph, cut some of it out in order to make it fit. Okay? And we will discuss some of these in a little bit later area. This was a frequency a frequency bar graph. A relative frequency bar graph, what it has is it has the relative frequency and the category. Notice I didn't just put category, I put color because that's what I'm describing. And so on the relative frequency, which we calculated those relative frequencies, for brown the relative frequency was 0.267. Well, 0.267 is a little bit above 0.25. And for yellow, it was 0.222. So it's going to be about in the middle here. And what you will notice whenever you compare a frequency bar graph to a relative frequency bar graph, the heights of the bars are usually the same. A lot of it's going to depend on how you did your scale. If your scale was not counted by the same heights, then it might be a little bit off. But whenever we're looking at this, you can tell that on both of my graphs, my brown was definitely the highest, my blue was the smallest, and you can tell that green was shorter than orange. Red was taller than orange. It's the same situation here. So the heights of my graphs should be approximately the same. Now there's a special type of bar graph, and this special type of bar graph is what we call a Pareto. P-A-R-E-T-O, Pareto. This is still for categorical qualitative data. What this graph does is it draws the bars in descending order. Descending means from highest to lowest. So it looks like a stair step down. So whenever you're drawing a Pareto, the specificity of it is the fact that the bars go in order from height. Okay? So if I want to draw a Pareto for relative frequency of the M&M data, what I'm going to do is I still have my vertical and my horizontal axes. And we're talking about relative frequency here. So I'm going to label over here relative frequency, and then I'm going to look at what to count by. My relative frequencies ranged anywhere from a 0.06 to a 0.267. So if I count, if I say 0.05, 0.1, 0.15, 0.2, 0.25, 0.3, that allows me enough for all of my relative frequencies that I'm looking at. Now I'm going to put color along this horizontal axis. And so brown had the highest frequency, followed by yellow, then red, then orange, green, and blue had the lowest frequency. And so I need to go ahead and put these in order from the one with the highest frequency to the one with the lowest frequency. Then whenever I look at the brown, my relative frequency was a 0.267. So I have it up here a little bit above the 0.25. Yellow had a 0.22, so it's a little bit above the 0.2. Red was directly at 0.2. Orange was at a 0.133, so that's somewhere approximately here. Green was at a 0.11, which is just slightly below that. And blue was at a 0.067, so we're down here. Notice they stair-step down. This is what we're looking for in a Pareto. That where we have the highest frequency and going in order to the lowest frequency. That is what is special about the Pareto. Another type of bar graph that we're looking at is called a side-by-side bar graph. A side-by-side bar graph compares two data sets. And we've seen some of these before. What these look like is, especially if we have male versus female, or we have junior versus sophomore, or junior versus senior. These are things that we would like to compare. Please note, when you are doing comparisons on a side-by-side, you are always going to use relative frequencies. A lot of that is because you may not have the same sample size for male versus female. If you don't have the same sample size, then you're not going to get an accurate reading of which one has the higher relative frequency, which one has the higher percentage. If you use a frequency for a side-by-side bar graph, it is very misleading. Example 5 says the following data represent the marital status in millions of U.S. residents age 18 years of age or older in 1990 and 2006. Draw a side-by-side relative frequency bar graph of the data. In 1990, there were 40.4 million adults that had never been married. In 2006, there were 55.3 million adults. The first thing that we need to do is find the relative frequency for each category. You'll notice here I have the total But these are the categories that we're looking at. So these are our N values for 1990 and 2006. Whenever I find the relative frequency, I'm going to take 40.4 divided by 181.9. And I'm going to get a 0.222. And I'm going to find the relative frequencies for each of these. I highly recommend that you pause the video and attempt to find these frequencies yourselves. Okay? That way you know that you're doing it properly and can calculate them on your own. If you select to just look at what I am putting up here, that is perfectly fine. That is also your choice. And so now I have their relative frequencies. I don't really need these boxes because that's just looking at the totals. When I use these and I want to draw a side-by-side, again, I need those relative frequencies to be compared to. Another thing about side-by-sides, you really need one color to represent 1 year and a different color to represent another year. And you need to identify that. Now, let's say you don't have two different colors. You could do it where the 1990 you did with stripes, and the 2006 you did with dots. That is also another identifiable mark. So when we look at never married, I'm going to go through and draw in the 1990 bars first. When we talk about never married, the relative frequency was 0.222. So that's approximately here. You'll notice I'm not going all the way over because there are other categories that are never married. For married, it was 0.619. So I'm coming up here and coloring it in. Widowed was 0.076. So I'm down here. And for divorced, it was 0.083. I'm a little bit taller, not much. Then I want to go through and look at the 2006. For never married, I go up to 0.252. So that's a little bit above, not a lot. And then I'm going to do polka dots. For married, it was 581. So I'm up here, not quite at 0.6. And I'm going to do dots. Widowed was 0.063. So I'm actually a little bit under this one. And for divorced, I was at 0.104. So now you can see that I have the green is for 1990, the red is for 2006, and you can compare never married. There were more never married in 2006 than there were in 1990. But notice in 1990 there were more that were married than in 2006. Same thing with the widowed, there were more in 1990 than there were in 2006. But look at the divorce. There's actually more divorced in 2006 than there were in 1990. So a side-by-side bar graph really helps us get to look at the data and compare two different things, especially years or male versus female. Go ahead and practice drawing the different types of bar graphs, the Pareto, the side-by-side, and then let me know if you have any questions.